Cops harassed a black man on the street, mocking him, shoving him, and humiliating him, all because of the color of his skin and the clothes he wore. They had no idea that the man they were abusing was Jahlani, a respected judge in the city. What started as a simple walk home turned into a shocking public confrontation, forcing the officers to face the consequences of their actions in front of a growing crowd. And when Jahlani's friend, Nyla, stepped in, revealing his true identity, everything changed. The officers' arrogance quickly turned into fear as justice finally caught up with them. Stick around to see how this intense story unfolds, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to catch every shocking twist. The afternoon sun hung low over the city streets, casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalks and worn brick buildings. People bustled past each other, some hurrying to catch the last buses or trains, others lingering in small clusters outside shops and cafes, their conversations blending into a dull city hum. Among them, Jahlani moved with quiet purpose, his hands tucked into the pockets of a simple gray hoodie, dark jeans scuffed at the knees, and worn sneakers that carried him briskly along the familiar route home from the courthouse. The city had long been his domain, not as a ruler, but as a servant of the law, someone who upheld justice and fairness in a system that often leaned the other way. Yet today there was no judge's robe, no gavel in hand, no hint of authority beyond the measured calm in his posture. Today he was just a man walking. It was that ordinary appearance, those simple clothes, that first caught the attention of the two officers leaning against a lamppost near the corner of Fifth Avenue. Lennox and Darian had been on patrol for most of the day, and the heat had left them irritable. The sight of a young black man walking alone in the neighborhood immediately drew their gaze. Lennox nudged Darian, smirking. "Check him out," he said, his voice low but laced with amusement. "Looks like he's up to something." Darian followed the man's path with a casual glance, nodding. "Yeah, probably thinks no one's watching. Let's see what he's carrying." Without warning, they approached him, stepping into his path with a practiced air of dominance. "Hey, stop right there!" Lennox barked, his tone sharp, his hand brushing against Jahlani's shoulder in a gesture that was more shove than touch. Jahlani froze for a moment, looking up at them with a composed expression that gave nothing away. "Is there a problem, officers?" he asked, his voice even, calm and controlled, betraying no fear. The two men exchanged a quick glance, one smirk spreading across Lennox's face. "Problem? You're standing here looking suspicious," he said, tilting his head to examine Jahlani's simple hoodie and jeans, as if they themselves were evidence of guilt. "Looks like someone's trying to sneak around the city without paying attention to the rules." Darian laughed softly, stepping closer. "Maybe he's up to more than we think," he added, reaching for Jahlani's shoulder and tugging slightly at the fabric. Jahlani did not flinch. He didn't raise his voice, didn't shove back. Instead, he stepped back just enough to regain balance, his eyes steady on the officers. "I'm simply walking home," he said, his tone measured but firm. "I assure you, I'm not violating any laws." The officers laughed again, louder this time, and Lennox leaned forward, gripping the collar of Jahlani's hoodie and giving it a sharp pull. "Oh, really?" he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "You expect me to believe that? You're out here alone looking like someone who doesn't belong, aren't you?" Darian joined in, shoving Jahlani slightly against the metal pole behind him, the rough edge digging into his shoulder. "Maybe you need a lesson about respecting authority," he said. A small crowd began to form. People passing by slowed their pace, phones now casually raised, some whispering to each other, curious about the confrontation unfolding. Jahlani remained still, his calmness standing out against the officer's aggression. "Respect," he said evenly, "is something earned, not demanded by intimidation. Force does not create justice. It only exposes weakness in character." The words hit Lennox like a slap. His smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of irritation. "Watch your mouth, man," he spat, tightening his grip on the hoodie. Darian leaned in, chest puffed, eyes narrowing. "You think you can talk to me like that? Who do you think you are?" Jahlani's gaze didn't waver. He spoke clearly, almost as if addressing a courtroom rather than the street. "I am someone who knows the weight of actions and the consequences they bring. I suggest you consider yours carefully before crossing the line further. The crowd had grown larger now, murmuring and nudging each other. Some were curious, some wary, and others just looking for the drama of it all. Phones were out, cameras focused, the tension thickening with every second. Lennox's hand struck Jahlani's shoulder harder this time, and Darian pushed him against the lamppost, anger boiling. "You're not going to talk your way out of this," Lennox shouted. Even as the officers escalated, Jahlani stayed composed. He didn't struggle, didn't curse, didn't fight back. Yet his words cut sharper than any blow. "Violence is not proof of strength," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It is a confession of fear, ignorance, and inability to reason." The words seemed to enrage them further. They didn't recognize the intellect behind them, only the challenge to their authority, the sting to their bruised egos. Lennox swung his hand to grab Jahlani again, this time attempting to twist his arm, and the first real scuffle began. Darian joined in, pushing Jahlani back into the sidewalk, and the small crowd gasped collectively. People started whispering, "Who is this man that they're attacking like this? Why are they hitting him?" Amid the growing chaos, a new figure emerged from the crowd. Nyla, a lawyer, a colleague and close friend of Jahlani, noticed the commotion and immediately recognized the danger. She was white, tall and commanding in presence, and she pushed her way through the crowd with purpose. "Stop!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the din. "Step back! You're assaulting him!" The officers barely spared her a glance, still focused on subduing Jahlani, but she stood her ground, eyes flashing with authority. "Do you understand what you're doing?" she demanded. "This is criminal. You have no right." The shoving and struggling continued, and the crowd now circled, pressing in closer. Phones were recording, whispers grew louder, and the tension was electric. Some people muttered that the man being attacked looked like he was speaking truthfully, that he wasn't reacting with fear or desperation, which only intensified curiosity. Nyla finally reached Jahlani, helping him regain balance. She looked directly at the officers, her voice sharp. "You're going to regret this. He is not just anyone. He's a judge, someone who upholds the law in this city. What you're doing is assaulting an officer of the court, and justice will come for you." The words hung in the air, and for a moment the crowd went silent, waiting for the officer's reaction. Lennox and Darian froze, their faces registering disbelief and shock. But the setup was not yet complete. The officer's arrogance had not been fully dismantled, and the weight of the coming consequences was only beginning to take root. Jahlani stood there, calm, composed, and unshaken. His breathing steady, his gaze unwavering. The city around him, the crowd of witnesses, and even the officers themselves began to sense that this was no ordinary encounter. Something bigger was unfolding. Something that would challenge assumptions, authority, and justice itself. And that was only the beginning. The crowd had grown to a sizable circle now. Faces pressed together, phones raised, whispers ricocheting off the walls of the nearby shops. The sunlight had begun to waver, casting long streaks over the asphalt, and every movement of Lennox and Darian seemed exaggerated in the heat of their frustration. Jahlani remained calm, almost unnervingly so, his posture unbroken despite the officer's growing aggression. The hoodie on his shoulders, the worn jeans, the scuffed sneakers, all of it marked him as ordinary in the eyes of the officers. Yet the measured confidence in his eyes made it clear he was anything but. Lennox jabbed his finger into Jahlani's chest, his face flushed with anger. "I said I don't like the way you're acting." "You think you can talk to me like that?" "Huh?" he shouted. The words were rough, almost trembling with suppressed rage. And Darian moved behind him, hands ready to push or strike at the first opportunity. "You're wrong," Jahlani replied evenly, his voice cutting through the noise of the street. "Assuming guilt based on appearance is not law enforcement. It is prejudice, masquerading as authority." The words seemed to sting Lennox, and he slammed his palm against Jahlani's shoulder, shoving him backward. Jahlani stumbled but did not fall, his balance impeccable, his calmness unshaken. "You're going to have to do better than intimidation to justify your actions," he said, voice steady, each syllable precise. Darian, breathing hard, tried to laugh it off, a harsh, nervous sound. "Oh, I get it," he said, circling Jahlani like a predator. You think you're clever, don't you? A smart one. Talking big, huh? He reached for Jahlani's arm, twisting it roughly behind his back. Stop, Jahlani said simply, a slight lift of his chin. You are acting unlawfully. Every move you make will be recorded, and every action has consequences. You are accountable for what you do. The words echoed through the crowd now, and some people stepped closer, curiosity giving way to shock. A woman muttered under her breath, "Who is this man? How can he stay so calm?" Another teenager whispered, "He's not scared at all. Why are they hitting him?" The physical struggle intensified. Lennox tried to push Jahlani against a nearby parked car, while Darian grabbed at his hoodie, yanking it roughly. But Jahlani's movements were precise and measured, not frantic, not panicked. Each step, each turn was deliberate, revealing discipline and control. The crowd could see it. Whispers turned into murmurs of admiration. Some pulled out their phones to record. Others simply leaned forward, mouths slightly agape. Then came the first real shock. Jahlani spoke while being roughly shoved, his voice calm but cutting through the officers' grunts and the murmuring crowd. Every action has its witness, he said. Every act of violence leaves a trail. Remember that what you are doing is not strength. It is weakness, exposed. Lennox froze for just a fraction of a second, an unsteady glance passing between him and Darian. That pause was enough to fuel Jahlani's presence further. The crowd noticed, reacting subtly, whispering to each other. Sensing the intelligence behind the man they had assumed was just another guy on the street. At that moment, Nyla pushed through the outer edge of the circle. Her heels clicked sharply on the pavement, her white blouse stark against the afternoon sun, her eyes blazing with authority and recognition. "Let him go," she demanded, stepping directly in front of Jahlani, hand raised in a protective gesture. "I said stop. Do you understand that this is assault? You are breaking the law." Darian sneered, shaking his head, attempting to intimidate her with his presence. "Who do you think you are?" He said, "Stay out of this." "I am someone who will ensure justice is upheld," she snapped back, her voice unwavering. "If you do not release him immediately, I will have you both arrested for assault. And I will make sure every person in this crowd sees what you've done." The crowd, now fully encircling the scene, buzzed with tension. The murmurs grew louder. Some began to chant softly, "Stop, stop!" Others raised phones, recording the officers' every aggressive move. The city street had transformed into an impromptu stage for public scrutiny, and Lennox and Darian were on full display. Despite their anger, the officers hesitated, caught between the growing crowd. Nyla's commanding presence and Jahlani's unyielding calm. The brief pause allowed Jahlani to straighten his posture fully, his voice again calm, resonant. "Violence can never prove authority," he said. "It only exposes ignorance. Every action leaves a record. Today, you are leaving yours in plain sight." The words seemed to inflame Lennox further. He shoved Jahlani again, more forcefully this time, and Darian's hand came down hard on his shoulder. The crowd gasped collectively. Phones captured the moments from every angle. Murmurs turned to audible concern. Why are they hitting him? What did he do? Nyla, seeing the escalation, stepped even closer, placing herself firmly between the officers and Jahlani. "Enough!" she shouted. "Step back now. Do you know who he is? You are attacking a man whose entire life is dedicated to justice. This is your crime, and it will be punished." Her sudden authority seemed to rattle Lennox and Darian. They blinked, briefly hesitant. That hesitation was enough to draw the crowd's focus fully to Jahlani, their curiosity now uncontainable. People began speaking to each other, asking questions, speculating. Some whispered the words they knew. "He's a lawyer, maybe." "No, wait. Someone important." Jahlani's calmness contrasted sharply with the officer's aggression. His voice carried to the edge of the crowd now, each word deliberate. "Every unjust act is a mark on your conscience. Every lie, every assault, every assumption made without proof will find its reckoning." Lennox, gritting his teeth, jabbed his finger again toward Jahlani's chest. "You think you're better than us?" he growled. "Yes," Jahlani replied simply, his eyes locking on Lennox's. "I do. Not because I am above the law, but because I live by it. I uphold it, and I will not allow you to misuse your position to harm the innocent." The crowd reacted audibly now, whispers turning into murmurs of awe and disbelief. Phones were everywhere, recording, capturing every shove rebuffed, every word. Every eye in that circle was focused on the man who refused to yield. Nyla finally raised her voice, clear and unwavering. "He is a judge," she shouted, stepping even closer, her hands spread in a gesture of authority. "He is Jahlani, a judge of this city. You are assaulting an officer of the court in public view. Step back and face the consequences." The revelation rippled through the crowd. Gasps, whispers, and astonished murmurs filled the air. The officers froze, their faces draining of color. Their arrogance had collided with reality, yet the moment had only begun to tip the scales. The rising action reached its peak here. The tension between the officers, Jahlani's calm authority, Nyla's intervention, and the crowd's electric curiosity. No one moved. No one spoke. The air was thick with anticipation. Everyone watching knew something monumental had just begun to unfold, and the city street, once ordinary, now felt like the stage of a public reckoning that would change everyone involved. The city street was electric with anticipation. Phones hovered in midair, people pressed closer, and the once casual hum of the afternoon had vanished completely. Lennox and Darian stood frozen, their aggression now replaced by disbelief. Nyla's voice rang out clear and unwavering. "He is Jahlani, a judge in this city. A respected officer of the court. You are assaulting someone whose life is dedicated to justice." The words hit Lennox first. His jaw went slack, the color draining from his face. Darian's eyes widened, hands trembling slightly as he released the hoodie he had been gripping. For a moment, neither of them moved, as if reality itself had physically stopped them in place. The crowd's whispers surged into a chorus of astonishment, awe, and indignation. "A judge?" someone muttered. Another voice asked, "Is this true?" Jahlani, still calm, adjusted his hoodie, a subtle reminder that he had been attacked unjustly, and his gaze swept across the officers. "Every action has consequences," he said evenly, his voice carrying through the now silent street. "What you have done here is not just an insult to me personally, but an assault on the principles you swore to uphold. You have shown your ignorance, your fear, and your inability to recognize true justice." Lennox stuttered, trying to regain composure. We didn't know. You didn't know," Jahlani interrupted, his voice cold, precise, and unwavering. "Ignorance does not excuse misconduct. Every shove, every word, every attempt to humiliate me in this public space has been recorded. Every witness here will testify to your actions. Your arrogance has met accountability." Darian's face flushed with panic. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, some chanting, some gasping in disbelief. Phones continued to record every motion. The officers glanced around helplessly. The eyes of the city were upon them, and for the first time, they felt the weight of their recklessness. Nyla stepped closer to Jahlani, her presence steadying him but also amplifying the intensity of the revelation. "He is not just a judge," she said sharply, directing her words at the officers. "He is a pillar of our court, a protector of law, and someone who holds your actions accountable. You assaulted him without cause, and now the law will serve justice. Not because of who he is, but because of what you have done." Lennox tried to step forward again, fumbling for authority, but the collective gaze of the crowd and Nyla's commanding presence froze him in place. He could see the phones, hear the whispers, and feel the weight of public judgment pressing down. The realization of their actions, the humiliation, the violation, the assault, sank in fully. Jahlani took a single step forward, calm and measured. "Your punishment will not be negotiated. Every law you swore to uphold will now demand your accountability. 10 years or more may not undo what you have done, but it will mark the beginning of true justice." The crowd reacted with audible astonishment. Some clapped softly, a few cheered, others simply gasped, holding their phones high to capture the moment. Even those who had doubted or hesitated now seemed to recognize the gravity of the moment. This was a reckoning. Lennox's hands fell to his sides. Darian's knees seemed to weaken, and both men exchanged a look of sheer horror. We didn't know," Lennox muttered again, but the words rang hollow, meaningless in the face of public scrutiny and legal consequence. A passerby stepped forward cautiously. "You can't just—" "Beat a man," they said. The crowd echoed the sentiment, voices overlapping, pointing, shouting, demanding the officers step back. Nyla remained close to Jahlani, her eyes scanning the officers unflinching. "Step aside. You are no longer in control here. Your actions have consequences and justice will find you, whether you like it or not." At that moment, the tension broke. Lennox and Darian staggered back, finally releasing the remnants of their aggression. Police backup had been called, arriving moments later, and the scene began to shift from confrontation to accountability. Officers were now being ordered to stand down, and the realization of what they had done finally settled fully on their faces. Jahlani remained composed throughout, his calm authority contrasting with the chaos around him. He spoke once more, to the crowd now fully witnessing, to the officers, and to anyone who might think of abuse again. Justice is not swayed by intimidation, by color, or by fear. Every action, good or bad, carries its consequence. Today is proof. The crowd erupted into murmurs, whispers, and soft applause. People turned their phones toward the officers, capturing everything. News would spread from this street in hours, and the officers would never escape the scrutiny of the law or the public. The scene had shifted completely. What began as a simple walk home had turned into a powerful lesson in dignity, justice, and accountability. And now, the climax had reached its peak. The officers fully aware of their wrongdoing. The crowd fully engaged in witnessing justice, and Jahlani standing unbroken, a symbol of authority and calm in the storm of public outrage. The sirens arrived in a rush, piercing the evening air, and the once tense street began to transform into a scene of authority reclaiming order. Lennox and Darian were guided away from the crowd, their heads bowed, faces flushed with shame and disbelief. Officers who had arrived as backup immediately began documenting the scene, speaking into radios and preparing official statements. The gravity of the situation was no longer abstract. The consequences of their actions were tangible, immediate, and irreversible. Jahlani stepped back, his posture calm and deliberate. He adjusted the hoodie over his shoulders, the casual attire now a stark contrast to the weight of the power he carried within. Nyla remained at his side, a reassuring presence, her arm brushing his slightly as she whispered, "It's over. They can't touch you now." He nodded subtly, the faintest smile of acknowledgement passing between them. The crowd lingered for a while, murmuring amongst themselves, sharing videos, retelling what they had just witnessed. People spoke not only of the officer's aggression, but also of the remarkable calm, intelligence, and dignity of Jahlani, who had stood unshaken through the harassment and physical assault. Witnesses now fully understood that the man who had defied the officers so composedly was no ordinary citizen. His every word had carried the weight of authority and law, and the public had seen it firsthand. Over the next days, news spread like wildfire. The videos captured by bystanders went viral, sparking outrage across social media, local news, and legal forums. Authorities launched a full investigation into Lennox and Darian's actions. Charges were filed for assault, abuse of power, and misconduct in the line of duty. The court proceedings were swift, given the overwhelming evidence and public attention. Testimonies from the crowd, coupled with the recordings, left no room for denial. Weeks later, the sentencing was delivered. Both officers received substantial prison terms, facing 10 years or more for their crimes. The public watched as the wheels of justice turned, and accountability was enforced. The verdict sent a message far beyond that single street. No one, regardless of position, could misuse authority to harm others without consequence. Meanwhile, Jahlani returned to his routine, entering the courthouse with a quiet resolve that spoke louder than any public statement. His reputation, already formidable, had been solidified by the ordeal. Nyla continued her work alongside him, her presence both comforting and professional. The two shared knowing glances across the courtroom, the silent understanding of colleagues bound by law, friendship, and respect. Though the confrontation had been violent and humiliating, it also became a moment of clarity for the city. Citizens who had witnessed the event learned the stark reality of prejudice and the power of calm, reasoned authority. People reflected on the difference between force and justice, intimidation and lawfulness. And for Jahlani, it was a reaffirmation of everything he had dedicated his life to: upholding fairness, standing firm in the face of injustice, and ensuring that those who abuse power would ultimately face their reckoning. As the sun set over the city skyline, casting long golden shadows over the courthouse steps, Jahlani paused for a moment outside, taking a deep breath of the evening air. The streets were calm again, the crowd dispersed, but the memory of the day lingered in the hearts and minds of everyone who had witnessed it. Justice had been served, dignity preserved, and the lesson clear. True authority comes not from fear, but from integrity, knowledge, and unwavering calm. He turned to Nyla, a faint smile crossing his face. "It worked as planned," he murmured softly, half to himself, half to her. "Justice always finds its way," she nodded, a quiet smile returning, knowing that their work, and their fight for fairness, had left its mark not only on the officers but on the city itself. And with that, the streets returned to their rhythm, the city alive with movement, yet forever marked by the day when justice had walked calmly, unshaken through the crowd, teaching a lesson that would not be forgotten.